Now, whether you like styled components or not is a absolutely personal thing. There is no wrong or right here. Now, when it comes to me, personally, I prefer CSS in CSS files. I like the separation of CSS and JavaScript. I like having clean JavaScript files, and I simply like default CSS. Now, of course, you can absolutely stick to the CSS approach we used at the beginning, where you had global, non-scoped styles, and you as a developer had to make sure you're not accidentally reusing names, class names, you're not accidentally affecting the styles of other components. That is definitely one route you can take. You can also, however, take CSS to the next level with a feature called CSS Modules. CSS Modules is a feature which is only available in projects that are configured to support it because it needs a code transformation that needs to be done before your code runs in the browser. Now, the good thing is the React projects created with Create React App, which we used, are already configured to support CSS modules. This is actually an excerpt from the official Create React App docs, where you learn how you can utilize CSS modules. And it's super simple to utilize CSS modules. So let me show you how it works. And let's start with the good old button again. Now, of course, you can stick to the styled component there, but I will comment this out and comment out this import, and instead add the import of React from React again, because I will comment in my own component again, this one, which uses JSX and which therefore needs the React import. Now we have the button CSS file, and in there we got the different styles, and we can leave that as it is. There's one thing we now need to change though. Of course, we need to add the import to the CSS file again, but instead of importing it like this, you now import it slightly different. You import classes or styles, totally up to you, from the CSS file. That's a syntax we haven't used before, but that is actually how you have to import from a CSS file if you want to use CSS modules. Actually, for that code transformation, which is needed behind the scenes, to happen, you also need to rename your file a little bit, your CSS file. You need to add .module in there so that it's named button.module.css. And then, of course, here you import from button.module.css. This is basically a signal to the underlying compilation process to transform the code so that CSS modules work. And I'll show you how they work behind the scenes in a second. So now we have this import, and now we need to do something with this imported styles thing here. We use it down there where we apply our class name. Instead of applying a string class name like this, you apply something dynamic. You refer to that styles thing which you're importing from the CSS file, and that thing turns out to be an object. And in that object, you'll have every class you defined in your file as a property. So if I added a button class here in the CSS file, I now have the button property here. And that's all we need to do. This will apply this button class in a special way to this button element here. Let's see it in action. Let's save this and go back to our application. And we see the button looks the way it looked before. Now we see something interesting if we inspect this here in the DevTools. On the button, you see a very strange class. This is not the same class as added by styled components. Those classes looked like this here on the div. Instead, this looks a bit like the class we defined, button, but with more information added to it. It's basically component name underscore our class name in the CSS file, double underscore some unique hash. What CSS modules does, or what this concept of CSS modules does, what the build process does under the hood, is it takes those CSS classes in the CSS file and basically changes those class names to be unique. That's the core thing it does. For every component, it changes the class names of the classes you're importing here, so of the CSS file you're importing, to be unique. So if you import from the CSS file here in the button component, it will create unique classes, unique versions of all those styles and classes here for this component. And for that, it generates brand new class names that look like this. Inside of these class names, your styles will be. So it will just keep your styles. It will not touch those, but wrapped into this new class name. You can see this if you expand the head section here in the rendered DOM. There you will see a bunch of style tags. And if we now search for the one here it is for the button, we see that's this newly generated class name. Here we have our button styles, and that newly generated class name is also used on the focus style, on the hover, and on the active style. And with that, this CSS modules concept ensures that the CSS styles we set up in a CSS file are scoped to the component we import this file into. For that, we need to work with CSS classes here, because we then access those classes as properties on the imported styles object. This is how we basically make the connection between these dynamically generated class names, which we as a developer don't know in advance, and our components here. And that's also what you see here in the official docs. That's in the end all that's to it. This is how you can use CSS modules. And for me, that's actually the best of both worlds. We have our styles set up in CSS files, but they're still scoped to the components where we use them. So in the next module, let's also port the course input back to use the CSS file. And then I will also show you how to use media queries with CSS modules.